Welcome. I'm so glad that you were able to come today. We're going to talk about all sorts of fun stuff from Bailey's Key Math 3 assessment. We're going to talk about her results. We're going to talk about the observations I saw in her, and we're also going to talk about some recommendations and interventions that I think Bailey will benefit from. So when we first began the assessment, Bailey was attentive, and she seemed like she was okay with getting started. She's like, I had to do it, and I was there. And she expressed that she thought math was okay, and some things were easy, and some things were hard, but her teachers were nice, so that's what we like to hear. She never seemed too bored. She made some good conversation throughout the assessment. Got to know some fun facts about Bailey, so I would say she did really well with keeping that rapport and keeping her attention focused. She made a really good eye contact as well. When we would get to questions that Bailey wasn't sure about, she would make that clear. She would say, I've never seen this before, or I don't know what this is. And that was almost good from the examiner's part because it kind of shed a light on the way she was feeling during the test. So that was good. She often self-corrected her answers, which it's a good thing. She's noticing her mistakes, but Bailey's in 8th grade now, and she's going to be going into high school, so we definitely want her feeling nice and confident in the answers that she produces, especially in the years to come and in a new environment with some new teachers. So we're going to focus on that for sure. Bailey did tend to bite her nails a little bit throughout the assessment, but I think she was just getting a little bored. She never seemed too restless. Overall, the results of the present assessment appear to be valid and reliable indications of Bailey's levels of current academic functioning, for sure. The Key Math 3 subtests that we're going to go over are just the basic concepts. She also did applications and operations, and those all form together to be a cumulative score, but we're just going to look at basic concepts, which has 5 different subtests in it. It has numeration, algebra, geometry, measurement, and data analysis and probability. Here are these fancy number scores, but I think this chart will make a lot more sense to you. So this shaded area that we have right here is the average range. The only numbers I'm going to bother you with through this whole discussion are 7 through 13 because that's what we want Bailey in. All of this is below average and all of this is above average. As you can see, most of Bailey's scores within her basic concepts, those 5 tests right there, fall in between below average and average range. So we would call that below average to average. Numeration, that first test there, is the only one that falls completely below average because the scores there are 3.5 to 6.5. So she's half a point lower than the average range. She's close, but she's still considered below average. I know it might seem kind of funky since some of these overlap and you're like, below average to average, why isn't it just one of them? Well, these assessments definitely take into the account that a student doesn't perform the same every day. So those confidence intervals give us the chance to have some leeway and to say, even if a student took it on a different day, they'd probably still fall within that band. So calling it below average to average is a good answer, considering it could be different. So the other thing about the scores that we'll just touch on now is that Bailey is in the 9th percentile for this cluster. Percentiles, they indicate the percentage of individuals who scored at or below a particular score. So for example, Bailey being at the 9th percentile means she scored at or above 9% of her peers in her current level of academic functioning. So 9's a little low. We'd like to get that up a little bit more, but I think we can. I think we definitely can with our recommendations and the interventions that will be coming Bailey's way. So here I'll show you this one more time. We will go through them a little more in depth, and I will tell you the numbers of each subtest. And here down at the bottom is her overall basic skills cluster, which is falls right in the below average to average range, just like those other 4 subtests besides numeration. So let's talk a little bit specifically about each of these subtests. The first one Bailey participated in was numeration. This is where Bailey explored whole and rational numbers. She was able to answer the question that was, how many times does 10 go into 120? She produced the answer 12, so that was good. Good job, Bailey. She had trouble with ordering some decimal points and negative and positive numbers, so that can be a focus area, as well as working with fractions. She struggled with simplifying 4 over 10, and she also struggled with the question, 1 of a set of 6 is, which would be 1 over 6, and she just said 1. So she could definitely use some help with fractions, and we'll talk more about that when we get into our recommendations. The next subtest Bailey did was algebra. She actually stuck her tongue out at this one. She didn't seem too thrilled to do any algebra. But she expressed that she's never seen anything like a couple of the problems before and seemed a little confused, so it was understandable where she was coming from. She had to do some sorting, some classifying, and some ordering. She did well at first. She got the first 5 correct, where she had to do some adding and subtracting and expressing, even though the expressing was a total guess. So that was something that she had never seen before as expressions. When it got to some missing numbers, she struggled a little bit with that, and having to fill in the blanks of addition and subtraction, she struggled a little bit there too. When we got to the geometry section, this was actually one of Bailey's higher scoring subtests. So I will show you guys the other 2 there. Her algebra one was between 4.4 and 7.6. So as I mentioned before, about a little more than half a point above. And then her geometry one was actually 5 to 9. So she's a couple points above that average range, so that's good. So that's one of her higher ones. In the geometry subtest, she was asked to analyze, describe, compare, classify 2 to 3-dimensional figures, and kind of manipulate with some things. Bailey definitely could use some focus on shapes, but she didn't do too bad. She did well. She was able to identify parallel lines. She was able to identify differences in given stick figures. She just struggled a lot with unfolding images of a folded shape, like deciding what one would match that, comparing cube views, saying what shapes would fit into another one, how triangles might be similar. She kind of struggled with things like that. So I think focusing on geometry and shapes would be something that's really beneficial for Bailey in the long run. The next subtest that she did was a measurement. This is where she had to kind of estimate some things. We worked with some money and we worked with some time. She did pretty well with the estimations in all of it until it got a little tougher, but that really showed us what she needs help with. For example, Bailey struggled with putting a certain amount of coins into another. So for example, how many quarters would be 15 dimes and how many nickels would be 20 pennies. So she definitely needs some work with things like that, as well as establishing the least amount of coins to make a certain amount of money. So we will definitely be working on things like that in the future. And then lastly, her last subtest was data analysis and probability. This is where she had to collect and display and interpret some data, had to look at some probability. She interpreted some tables and some tally charts. She was able to, use rows tables to compare accounts. She was able to use some picture graphs. She self-corrected a couple times in this one. She was also able to identify a speed change in a line graph, so that was good to see. But then if they were to ask, how many minutes until he got a flat tire and she had to estimate that, that was tough for her. So those those tougher ones started to decline a little bit on Bailey's progress, but nothing too crazy. Just with some explicit instruction, I think Bailey will be doing a lot better. So let's look at these graphs one more time before we get into our recommendations. So you can see that the bottom one, the data analysis and probability, was another 5 to 9, just like the geometry. And then measurement was 5.2 to 8.8. So that was pretty up there too. I would say those 3 are definitely significantly better than the other 2. So those ones are good, but they also could still use some work. So we'll look into that. Some recommendations that I have for Bailey is definitely explicit instruction on things. When it comes to algebraic equations, I think that a breakdown would be nice. Maybe some sort of way to memorize things, come up with a song or a chant. I think that would help Bailey a lot with those standard types of things that we can do. When it comes to geometry, I actually saw an app called Geometra's Sketchpad, and it is a tangible, visual way to learn that increases engagement, understanding, and achievement. She'll be able to manipulate some fractions and shapes and put shapes into other shapes and fold them in different ways. And we will use explicit instruction, and I will assist Bailey and give her feedback until she's comfortable doing it on her own. Bailey expressed numerous times throughout the test that she wanted to know the answer. She said, "Am I right?" or "I'm nervous," and I think with some feedback, Bailey would do really well. At one point, she called them roundy things and pyramids for circles and triangles. We definitely want her to use some better jargon as she gets into the high school years. Another thing I think Bailey might benefit from is working with some money. I think we could use real life, tangible money with some graphic organizers to really get her on the right track with them. We can start with explicit instruction on numerous ways to make $1 with all the different coins, and then asking her to put those values into other values, $5, $10, $15, and gradually move her way up with that. So the accommodations that fall within these are some visuals, definitely graphic organizers. Graphic organizers would also be useful for the algebra, some scaffolding just to build it up, and maybe even some peer-to-peer help on that as well. Overall, the intervention that I think Bailey would really benefit from is called Concrete Representational Abstract. This will help her gain a conceptual understanding for the mathematics process rather than just completing an algorithm or handing her a problem or a website link and saying, "Have at it." The concrete means that you'll interact and manipulate three-dimensional objects, our geometry figures, our algebra tiles, money, all of those things that she needs help with. And then the representational means you'll use a two-dimensional drawings to represent the problem. So first she's being visual, and then she's actually physically drawing. We can also supply her a whiteboard and an expo marker. That way it might be a little more motivating for her to draw, and she might enjoy it a little bit more, which means it might stick in her head a little bit more. As well as the last one is abstract, is that students should students solve problems with numbers, symbols, and words without any concrete or representational assistance. So again, kind of moving into those high school years and not always going to have us teachers to help her. Hopefully these things will kind of guide her and scaffold her into understanding how to do certain parts of mathematics without those things. It's definitely been shown to be an effective approach to teaching mathematics. It relies heavily on modeling and immediate feedback, which, like I said before, Bailey wanted that feedback, but unfortunately we can't give it while testing. But she wants the feedback. She wanted to know if she was right. She wanted to know what she could do. So I think if Bailey was able to vocalize what she was thinking and her thought process, she would do very, very well with mathematics and geometry in these areas that she's struggling with. And again, this would all use explicit instruction. So let me just take a quick peruse over and make sure I covered everything with you. We can look at this chart one more time. So you can see this again. So again, Bailey is considered below average to average for these 4 subtests besides numeration because she only got to 6.5. And those numbers were 7 through 13. Down here we have her basic skills cluster overall test. These numbers are a little different, so don't pay attention to them. Just look at the shaded area and see that yes, she does fall within it, and she falls within that range by just the brink, by just a couple of points. So we will definitely put some focus on Bailey's math skills. We hope to scaffold her up to feel super confident in her math work. We want her to go to high school and feel like she has strategies and she has things she can use and good memories about math. We want to shy away from those bad memories, keep her tongue in her mouth when she hears algebra, and we want her to just really feel like she's learning. If you have any questions for me, please ask. I hope you agree with these recommendations and accommodations and interventions for Bailey, and we only hope that those numbers go up a little more into the average range and she succeeds in her life with math. Thank you so much for coming today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.